Hello, my name is Idris Abdul Hafiz. I am a resident of Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and I am also an activist of the Cedar Rapids chapter of Results. What is Results? Results is an organization that is dedicated to addressing hunger and poverty throughout the world and empowering U.S. residents to be involved in the political atmosphere. When we think of addressing hunger and poverty, what often comes to mind are things such as offering aid in the form of food or in the form of finances. However, I'm here today to talk about addressing hunger and poverty with a different avenue, from a different aspect, and that is education, specifically the Global Fund for Education. As a college graduate, I cannot stress enough the importance and the value of education. I come from a very large family of 9 children, and I grew up in Gary, Indiana. For those of you who don't know, Gary, Indiana is a city in northwestern Indiana that consists of approximately 100,000 people, but is notorious for a high crime rate and unemployment. Growing up in Gary, Indiana, I saw several friends and family members fall victim to the ills of society. And in addition to that, I saw many residents in Gary who seemed very ill-equipped to address these issues. With all this in mind, it became obvious to me that education was the key to protecting myself against these ills and preparing myself to actually address these ills in the future.
The Millennium Development Goal of education for all is a bold one, and it's one that we should be able to reach, but it's one that we're not on track to reach at the moment. So it's going to take a real leap from where we are now, which is some countries in sub-Saharan Africa having less than a quarter of students in secondary school and less than half in primary education, to get to universal basic education. What it's going to take is the kind of political commitment in the richest countries in the world that Results is so good at creating.
All children have the right to an education regardless of their socio-economic status. Education is the keystone of long-term economic development and should be the foundation upon which U.S. economic assistance is built. The late Malik Shabazz, who's commonly referred to as Malcolm X, once stated that to educate a man is to educate one individual. To educate a woman is to educate and liberate an entire generation. The truth of this quote really resonates the most in the poorest of countries. On average, for a girl in a poor country, each additional year of education beyond grade 3 or 4 will lead to an increase of 20% in wages and a 10% decrease in the likelihood that her children would die from preventable causes. One analysis warns that in the 65 low, middle income, and transition countries that do not offer the same secondary education opportunities to girls as they do to boys, an estimated $92 billion of economic productivity is lost. Compare this to the amount of aid that is given from foreign donors, which amounts to $103.7 billion. A new World Bank report warns that poor children are the most likely to suffer during this financial crisis because their families are more likely to decrease spending on health, education, and other basic
in school fee elimination. Uganda, using money that it got from debt relief, was a pioneer in this in the late 1990s. Tanzania in 2000, and in the last couple of years, Kenya has moved forward. In each of those countries, what we've seen is enormous increase in enrollment. In fact, a doubling in Tanzania, over 1 million new kids in Kenya. And the reason why it's worked in those countries is because they were committed to getting that money to the school level. In fact, what they have is school bank accounts and local school governance committees that play a role in deciding how funds get spent. So these countries, by moving forward, have shown that school fee elimination, can be extremely successful. Grassroots action has been at the center of the response to the crisis of orphans and vulnerable children. It was literally not on the radar screen when the AIDS initiative was announced. What happened, though, was local activists got the attention of people like Senator Lugar in Indiana and others, convincing him to introduce legislation on this. So that legislation is now passed. So we've got comprehensive orphan legislation that's passed. We've got a clear earmark, about 10% of funding should go to orphans. The reason that's happened is because of local activists getting in touch with their member of Congress and telling them that this is such an important issue.
From all the work that I've done in any country, particularly in Tanzania, you find that children were actually leaving school because of inability to pay fees. Not just the fees, but the costs of education. The discussion is not about fees. The discussion is about the costs of education, because tuition fees are usually a minimal part of the total costs. What happens is, in addition to fees, parents are asked to pay for building instruction, for exercise books, for chalk, for all kinds of things. And when you tally all of these vis-a-vis household income, it really is too burdensome for parents. It was dramatic. After we had discussed the whole issue for about 6-9 months, and people knew that this was coming along, and they knew the capitation grants were there, and they knew that the transfer was going to be into school bank accounts. They were going to manage it. They would be guided to do school plans so that they have proper pedagogical plans for their schools. They were provided designs to have good structures when they build their classrooms. It was just enormous. I think in the first year, you had an additional 1 million children going into school.
Poorer governments face dwindling funds from donors as well as national income. This decrease in local and national resources will result in fewer, if any, countries eliminating primary school fees, and efforts to drop secondary school fees will completely stagnate. There will be fewer resources to assist vulnerable children such as girls, minorities, rural populations, children orphaned by AIDS, and those affected by conflict. Education system resources will be stretched such that the school maintenance and new construction would also stagnate. Teacher salaries may not be paid. This will result in absenteeism as a result of teachers leaving their job in order to seek other means to provide for their families. Last but not least, fewer students will enter and stay into school because their parents need help both in and outside of the home. Currently, at least 75 million primary school-aged children around the world are not enrolled in school. According to the National Center for Education Statistics, that number is equivalent to nearly 1.5 times the total number of students enrolled in primary and secondary school here in the United States. In the current global economic crisis, and without increased resources from the international community, this number only stands to grow. In March, the World Bank published research showing that the spreading crisis will push 46 million additional people into poverty in the year 2009 alone. This will make it much harder for children to pay school fees and other educational costs.